Hey everybody, we are live, or I am live by myself. How is everybody today? Just wanted to say again, thanks for stopping by. I'm just working on a mix here. As I talked about earlier, the last few days as we've been trying to get this live stream up and running, and I'm working kind of on a country rock mix, and I thought it would be a good idea, although it's not being done completely from scratch. I'm about halfway through the mix at this point, but maybe a good idea over the next few live streams to go ahead and walk you through each section of the mix and kind of show you what I'm thinking, kind of show you my process on this particular song, and then when we get to the end, we'll eventually have a before and after, because I did a static mix and printed that, and then we can kind of compare the two. So if you're in the chat, hey Johnny, how are you? Stop in and say hi. I'll wait a few minutes and then I'll get started. I'll wait if we get 4 or 5 people here and then we'll jump in. And if you're coming in late, have no fear. This will be on YouTube in the archive. It'll be under a playlist called Live Streams, or is already a Live Streams playlist at Home Recording Made Easy on the YouTube channel. You can check out all the prior live streams that are in there. There's not many, but we're going to continue to grow that catalog and you'll have stuff there. So I'm going to try to keep everything titled in a way that'll make sense, so you guys could kind of look back and see what you might have missed if you're joining us late. So we have 7 people jumping in here right now. We'll wait till we get about 10 people and then we're going to jump on into this mix. So this mix again is a country rock tune. It's a really great tune. It was recorded very, very well. It's by a band called Moonshine, and the name of the song is Come Home. Almost forgot the name of the song. So we'll jump in. Let me just check out the chat really quick. We have about 9 people here. How's everybody doing? Let me know where you're all from, and then we'll head on into this mix. I know where Johnny's from. He's from over the pond. Where is everybody else from? Just say hello. Make sure you can hear me okay. And then we'll go ahead and we'll get started. And I'll be keeping my eye on the chat, which is over here on my laptop here to my left. So if I'm looking away, that's what I'm looking at. So while the mix is kind of playing and we're kind of looking at Studio One, I'll kind of check and make sure that everything is kind of working. And if something isn't working for some reason, please speak up. And again, I apologize in advance if that's what's going on. So anyhow, what we're going to do is we're going to jump on in. We have about 12 people here now. I'm going to jump right into Studio One, and you guys are going to see what's going on there, and I'll just make sure that you guys can see it. Got people here from Italy. That's really cool. Okay, so let's move on over, and let me get this screen out of the way for you. So now we are in Studio One, and so just make sure everybody can see that. Please let me know that everybody can see that. And again, there'll be about a 10-second delay here, so that's to be expected. And I'll walk you through the session and let you know where what we have as far as the layout goes. And then we'll start taking a look at the master bus, and we'll take a look at the drums. So in any event, and before we get started, make sure that your resolution on your YouTube player there, if you're watching this obviously on YouTube, set it to 1080p. That's going to give you kind of the best resolution and the best clarity from what we've kind of learned a little bit earlier today. Make sure you do that, because if you blow it up full screen and it's anything less than 1080, it's going to kind of get blurry, maybe a little out of focus, and you may not be able to see the detail all that well. So make sure you do that. And then also, too, if you're watching this on a mobile device or using earbuds or something like that, I urge you to go back later on and try to listen to this on a good set of headphones, or your studio monitors is probably the best way to do it. Hey, Randall, how are you? So that's that. And I'll leave all that in the notes below. So anyway, let's take a look at this session here in front of us. So again, it's by the band Moonshine. And this is a great country rock track. What I'm going to do is going to play it from the top here. Just going to play through maybe the end of the first chorus so you get a feel for what we have. Now, this song is only about 50% mixed at this point. We still have a ways to go. But this is, we're going in the right direction. So it's not a completely mixed project at this point. So let's take a listen to what we're kind of dealing with here.
Stay to keep you from running away, and I will
Okay, so there we are. So there's the verse, the first couple of verses there in the chorus. Radio rock, right? Radio country rock. Sounds like a commercial hit. Great song. Okay, so let's walk through what we're doing here. So the first thing I want to do is let me take you through kind of the layout of the session down here. If we take a look at the mixer view down here, I'll expand this a little bit. So over here on the left, starting on the left, moving left to right, we have kick in and kick out. We have a kick sample that I added, snare top and bottom and a sample. We also have hi-hats. We have a tom 1 and 2, 2 rack toms, an overhead left and right, and rooms left and right. Next to that, we have a drum verb, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We have a bass. We have guitar, kind of rhythm guitar verses, I'm calling, just guitar, a rhythm guitar that's in the verse sections. The two next to that are, in green here, are the chorus guitars. And then we had a lead guitar that's kind of playing little bits and bobs throughout the whole song with a tiny little solo there in the middle. Then we have a guitar reverb. Then we have a piano track left and right. And then we have a piano or keys verb. And then down here at the end, we have our lead vocals. Here we have a double, which are muted right now because I haven't even really, other than listen to the rough, I haven't really did anything with them yet. You only heard one vocal track there. Then we have a harmony left and right, which we haven't really did anything with yet with either. And then at the end here, we have a vocal delay. We have 3 vocal reverbs, which I haven't even worked with yet. So those are just kind of placeholders for what is going to be reverbs at one point, and they may change a little bit. This red track here is a print track because I'm doing analog summing. You don't need to worry about that. It's just something that I'm doing in my session. And then down here, over here in this gray, these 5 or 6 tracks here are all the busing system for drums, bass, guitar, keys, lead vocals, and background vocals. And then last but certainly not least, down here in purple, we have parallel compression tracks, which have not, nothing's been done there yet either. So what you basically heard was no parallel compression at all because I haven't even set that up yet. We're, like I said, in only maybe halfway through this mix. Okay, so that's kind of the layout of the session. So let's take a look at the, we'll start with the master bus. So my master bus is over here on the far left-hand side called return 7 and 8. And again, that's because I'm doing analog summing. Just be aware of that. And so all my bus plugins are going to go over here on the left. So let's take a look at what I'm using for a change. So before we even take a look at that, let me just kind of explain, because you see lots of plugins here and you're going to see a lot of redundancy. So the way I mix this song and the way I like to mix a lot of my tracks is I like to set up my mixing kind of like an analog studio would have been. Meaning that I try to use the signal flow and such of how it would be done in an analog studio. So in other words, you have musicians out on the live floor. They would be tracking into a 16-track multi-track tape machine. From there, it would go into a console of some kind, whether it's an SSL, an Eve API, or what have you. And then from there, it may go into some outboard processing. There may be some, outboard EQs and outboard compressors on certain tracks. And then from there, it's going to go through a mix bus on the board. And then out of the board, it's going to go to a two-track tape machine. So that's kind of how I set up the signal flow. Okay, just so you're kind of aware of that. Okay, so on the master bus, the first plugin I'm starting with is the Virtual Console Collection by Slate Digital. A lot of you've probably seen this before. If you have not and you don't know anything about these Slate Digital plugins, you can always head out to slatedigital.com and check them out. I'm using the API console here on this particular mix. Because I just happen to know that this particular session was recorded in a studio that used an API console. So I wanted to kind of give it the same kind of vibe. So even though there was already some analog processing done to the raw tracks going through an API desk, I wanted to kind of use an API on this mix as well. So that's the first plugin we're using. The second plugin I'm using is the Slate Digital, the VBC, the Virtual Bus Compression Rack. And I got all 3 compressors up, although right now I'm only using the one in the middle here, which is the FG Red, the Focusrite. Every mix is a little different. Typically, a lot of times I use the FG-Mu, but I like to put up the entire plugin, and I like to switch back and forth as I get towards the middle and the end of the mix to see what compressor I like, better on what particular song. This particular song, to me, my focus is really to kind of use the FG Red for the most part, and then I may switch back and forth throughout this mix. So the ratio here is only set 2:1. We're using a fairly medium fast attack with a medium slow release. We're just kind of hitting maybe 2 dB at most. What's nice about this particular compressors, they have this drive knob here, which gives you some additional harmonic distortion and such. And I got it drive pretty good, probably around 60%. It also has a high pass filter feature, which basically means anything below, it's set at 41 hertz now, so anything below 41 hertz is not going to affect the way, it's not going to be compressed. The compressor is not going to be affected by that. So things like the low subsonics of the kick drum are not going to affect the compressor. And that's a nice feature on the Slate compressors. And I have it all the way up at 100% mix. And I think that's it. And then the makeup gain is only going about 1.8 dB because we're only compressing about a dB or so. So that is the FG-Red. And then after that, I'm going to the VMR, which is the virtual mix rack by Slate Digital. Right now, you can see there's no plugins in here. I kind of just use this as a placeholder in my template because after the compression, depending on the mix, sometimes I may want to use a little additional EQ, or I may use things like this, like the Custom Series Lift, if I need a little more top or a little more bottom, or I might use something like Revival. And sometimes I don't use anything at all, but I like to have another one of these in my mix bus just here in case I feel like I need something as I'm going through the mix. And then last but not least, on the master bus, I'm using the VTM, the virtual tape machine, again on the half-inch 2-track mode at 15 IPS per second. And just to, shave off kind of the top end. So the difference between, 15 and 30 IPS per second, if you're running it at 30 IPS per second, the tape's going to move a lot faster. Therefore, it's going to be a little bit more transparent, a little bit more open. 15 IPS, as it slows down the tape speed, tends to shave off the top end transients just a little bit and kind of warms up the mix a little bit more. So a lot of times I'll use 15 IPS on the master bus, and then throughout the individual tracks, I might use 30 IPS. It depends on the song. But typically I try to use 15 IPS on the master bus to kind of give that little extra compression at the very end. Okay, so that's the master bus. So now if we take a look at the drums over here in brown, first let's start off with the drum bus. So on the drum bus, we're mixing everything into my drum bus processing. I get a lot of questions about, should I mix into the compressor? Should I put the bus compressors on before or after the mix? I like to mix into them. I don't like to put them on after the fact because I like to mix into them and generate my tone and my vibe that way. Because if you wait till the end, I find that if you throw the compressor on after the mix, it can radically shift the tone. It can radically shift the overall sound of the mix. So anyway, on the first plugin I'm using here is the mix bus portion of the VCC, again on the drum bus, again set to the API console. And all my VCC instances are all grouped to group 1, which means if I hit bypass, it will not only turn it off here at this particular plugin, but it turns it off across the entire mix, which is helpful to do kind of the before and after. And then for my drum bus compressor, I'm using the Slate Digital FG Gray, which is the SSL emulation. This tends to be one of my favorite drum bus compressors because it just adds so much life and so much character to the drums. And when we get to it, we'll kind of turn it on and off and you can kind of hear the difference. Again, setting it to a 2.5 to 1 ratio, medium fast release, medium slow attack. And again, we're not going to be hitting this very hard, maybe a dB or 2. The high pass filter is set at 42 hertz again on this compressor as well. The mix is at 100% and we're only adding about 1.8 dB of gain. So basically this is a preset called Classic Mix and I just tweaked it slightly to my liking and I tend to like it and I may adjust this as I'm going on through the mix. So that is kind of the setup of the master bus and the drum bus. Now let's start off with the kick. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to solo up the drums here as best I can. So let's mute everything else here. Mute, 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 mute. Okay, let's go down here and I'm going to take away the drum reverb for now. And then I'm just going to start off with, or actually I'll let you just hear the drum sound on its own with the reverb. So here's just the drums as, without the rest of the mix playing. Here's kind of what we have for drums. Let me loop this section. This is kind of semi-final mix on the drums. So as you can see we're hitting the VCC on the drum bus, not killing it. And here on the FG Gray, you can see we're only compressing about a dB. If I just shut this off, So again, I'm not sure how well this will come over live stream, the audio, but there's a little bit better than a subtle difference here with this FG Gray. When you take away the FG Gray, it kind of falls kind of flat. The FG Gray just adds a lot more character and a lot more life to it. And again, it's subtle, but it's certainly there. So let's go ahead now. Let's take a look at individual elements of the drums. So I'm just going to mute everything here, with the exception of the kick in. So we have 3 kick mics. We have a kick in, we have a kick out, and we have a kick sample. Okay, so the kick in kind of sounds like this. And I'll turn these up and screw up my mix on so you can hear this better. Okay, so if we walk through the processing here, so all the drums, the very first plugin that I'm using on all the drums is Auto Align by Sound Radix. I've talked a lot about this on my YouTube channel. I'm not going to go into all the nitty gritty of how to use it here. Go check out the video that I just posted on the YouTube channel. Talks about this. Auto Align is an awesome plugin, and if you're doing things with drums, you should have something like this, if not this plugin itself. So Auto Align is the first signal in the chain. Okay. Second plugin is the virtual tape machine. So as I said before, on the master bus, I'm using 15 IPs, but on the individual tracks, I'm using 30 IPs. And I'm doing that because I want a little bit more open sound, and I don't want to lose any of the punch of the drums. I want the drums to be kind of open and kind of and have this be a little bit more transparent. There is still a little bit of compression going on there, but what you're going to find throughout this entire mix, once we even get beyond the drums, that most of the compression that I'm doing is more controlled. It's done in very small stages, multiple stages along the way, and I'm not slamming any one thing very hard. So that's what we're doing here, and you can see not hitting it very hard. And then from there, we're going to the virtual mix rack, or the VCC. And then what I'm doing here is I put a FabFilter Pro Q on here in EQ just to get rid of, I was kind of searching for kind of a couple of frequencies that were bothering me. So I pulled out at about 422 Hertz, about 2 dB. And then at the, this should be like this. And then down here, I did a high cut filter at about 13K just to get rid of, all that nastiness up top. If it's not needed, I kind of get rid of it. Okay, and then from there, I'm going to the Universal Audio API Vision channel strip. So again, as I talked about it in the intro here, I like to set up my studio kind of like an analog studio would be, my DAW, like an analog studio. So again, everything's going through tape, everything's going through the VCC. And I'm a big fan of using channel strips. And I use channel strips an awful lot, and there's only a few companies that make really good ones, and I find the better ones are Universal Audio. This happens to be one of them, the API channel strip. They also make the Neve and an SSL, which I really like, and I own both of those as well. Waves also makes a really cool SSL channel strip, which I just picked up, which I use in another mix that I'll show you guys at another time. So I love to use channel strips, and the reason why I like to use channel strips is because when you're using channel strips across all of your tracks, and again, it's emulating what you would have done in an analog studio. It gives the whole mix, in this case, all of our drums, it gives it a cohesiveness. When you're processing all the signal through all the kind of same plugins up front, it kind of glues everything together and it gives it that kind of vibe. So it kind of gives it, because we're using API on the VCC and we're using the API channel strips, it kind of gives it that API vibe. That's what it's intended to do. And channel strips are great too, because it's like an all-in-one shop. You have everything from filters to EQ to compressors to gates. You got everything you need in one plugin. And so I'm a real big fan of using channel strips, and I use them as much as I can in my production. So excuse me. So in any event, I'll just walk through quickly this particular channel strip and how it's laid out, and then, for future tracks, you'll kind of know. So over here at the top left-hand corner, we have the input side of it. We have the mic pre right here with a mic pre meter, okay? And then right beneath that, we have our filters. We have a high-pass filter and a low-pass filter, and you turn it on and off by this little button here. And as you can see, I have it on this kick drum, and I'm rolling off at about 30 Hertz. Okay, and then over here in the center section, we have our compressor. So we have our threshold here. Hopefully you can see that. This plugin's a little tough on certain things because the little toggle switches are not always so clearly, you can't always clearly see them. Over here we have our attack time. Now this is either a fast or a slow attack. It's just a toggle switch right here. Okay, and then over here in the gray section here, we have our depth, and then we have our gate, and then we have our gate hold and our gate release. So this is a gate. Did I say this was the compressor? This is the gate. Excuse me. This is the gate. The compressor's beneath it. So in this particular track, I have the gate on, and the reason why I have the gate on, if I could turn it off a second here, because we have a lot of that snare bleed going on in there. Now, I'm not a real big fan of gates, to be honest with you, and I don't use them that frequently. Normally, I would just maybe replace the kick with a sample, but I've already did that for other reasons, which we'll talk about in a bit. So I figured, let me try it on this channel strip. I don't use gates very frequently, so I try to get rid of as much of the snare bleed as I can. So I set it here. And as you can hear, most of that snare drum is gone. Okay, then beneath the gate, we have the compressor. So here in the black knob, we have our threshold. We have our attack toggle switch here. We have a medium, a slow, and a fast attack. All of my drums are set to a fast attack. We have our ratio here in this gray with the green kind of cap here. We have our gain reduction meter here. Right underneath it, we have a toggle switch. That's our knee. We have a hard and a soft knee. I'm setting it to soft knee. And then down here, we have our release. Okay, hopefully you guys can see this okay. And then we have our turn our compressor on off with this little button right here. So again, on all the drums, one of the things that I do when I'm setting up the drums is you're going to notice that all the ratios and all of the release times and the attack times are set exactly the same. And the reason in the knee setting. So it's the same release, the same ratio, the same attack, and the same knee settings. And the only thing I do between each individual drum is to adjust the threshold to whatever kind of compression I'm looking for. And again, the reason why I do that is because the drum kit, you know, is a 5 or 6 piece element instrument, right? So you have kick, snare, 2 toms, overheads, so on and so forth. You can have 8 or 10 different microphones going on there. And by keeping the same release, same ratio, same attack times, same knee settings, when you just dial in the threshold to get the kind of compression that you want for that particular element, what ends up happening is that, again, it kind of glues the drums together from a compression point of view, and the drums start to kind of push and pull and breathe as one unit. If you have drums that have all separate attack and release times and separate ratios and such, things are going to sound kind of disjointed. So that's, you know, one thing, you know, kind of a tip I give a lot of my newer students that are talking about compressors, especially when you get into channel strip processing. It's a good idea to kind of keep the drums with the same attack, same release, same ratio, same knee settings if there is one, and just adjust the threshold to taste. So as we're doing here, we're doing a fast attack. We're doing about a 3-to-1 ratio on all the drums, and we're doing probably a fairly quick medium. This is a fast, even on its slowest setting. This particular channel strip has a very quick release. So this is a fast release, even though it's set to a slightly more than medium slow, but it's not a slow release by any means. Oh, and there's also a toggle switch here called type. Is an old and a new style. It just got some different, you know, harmonic characteristics, some slight different tonal variation. I have everything set to new with a soft knee. So you're going to see I'm only compressing about 3 dB at its hardest hits. You can see how fast that release is, even though it's set more to a slower release, believe it or not. Okay, and then over here in the center, we have the EQ section, okay? So at the top here, we the way this is kind of laid out is the numbers in blue are the frequency ranges, and the numbers in white are, you know, how many dBs. So you have this kind of white, kind of little chicken head knob, if you can see that. And then you have this blue. By just clicking on the little blue part of the dial will change. Oops, don't want to screw that up. And sometimes it could be a little challenging trying to get these things, turned to the way you want them. And so we have, let's see. So this particular one goes from 2.5K all the way up to 20K. This one goes from 800 up to 12 high mids, 12.5K. This one goes from 75 hertz to 1K low mids. And then this one goes from 30 hertz to 400 low frequencies. Down underneath it, we have two buttons here. We have a pre-dynamics buttons, which means we put the EQ before the compressor by engaging that, or after the compressor. So I have it before, and then you turn the EQ on and off with this button here. And then lastly, on the right-hand side, we have the output meter here, and we have a gain trim pot here that if you're boosting some frequencies and you have a little bit more, volume coming out of the plugin after you're done processing, you could turn it down a little bit here, and then you just have a power button here. So just to show you the EQ quickly, you saw the compressor, the EQ, right around 10K, I got about 2 dB on the top end. At 5K, I got about 4 dB, boosting a lot of top here. And at 500 hertz, I rolled off about, what do I roll? About 4 dB at 500 to get rid of that hollow boxy sound. And then at 50 hertz, I got about a 2 dB bump. Okay, so if I shut off the EQ and play this. Okay, that's with EQ. Oh, turn it on. That's before with no EQ. With EQ. Okay, so it just brings in a little bit more slap. I think I may have slipped and adjusted the gate a little bit. We got a little bit too much snare coming in, but that's that is the kick in. So now on the kick out mic, I'm going to lower this down a little bit. I'll mute the kick in. Turn this up. So here's our kick out. It's giving us a little bit more of that low thumpy. The kick in is going to give us a little bit more of that slap. Okay, so we're starting with auto align, moving over to the virtual tape machine once again, same settings as on the other kick mic. Over to virtual console on the API setting. Again, over now to the fab filter once again, just doing a little bit of a bump here at about 63 hertz to give it a little bit more oomph. And then the high cut filter up at the top at around 7K. And then we're running again into the channel strip. So let's just look at the compression settings, and the gate. The gate's the same. Our compression settings are the same, as I said, 3-to-1 ratio, a medium, slow release, fast attack, soft knee on the new type desk, and we're getting about 2-3 dB at most. Okay. Over on the EQ, we have we pulled out about 4 dB at 500, and again at around 50 hertz, about 6 dB of a bump, just to give it again a little bit more bottom. And then this is what it sounds like before the EQ. After. Okay, pretty straightforward stuff. Then I added a kick sample, which was not part of the session originally. It's something that I did after the fact. So if we have our first two kick drums, here's what we kind of have together. Now if I bring in the sample, okay, so the sample was an afterthought. It was something that I just felt like as I was getting through the drums and through the bass guitar, the kick drums, even though they were there, I wanted the kick to really have a solid foundation. And I do this a lot of times with kick and snare. I'll add samples. And sometimes, I'll bring them in and just bring in a touch of them. And sometimes I'll bring in a little bit more. It depends on the mix. But I'm a big fan of using samples on drums, especially even drums like this that were recorded really well. You would think you don't really need them because the drums are recorded so well. A lot of people think of samples as drum replacement, which is true, replacing those kick drums that we just looked at with a sample, maybe a better sample, but it was recorded really well. I like to use samples as a way to also enhance what we already have. It isn't just a drum replacement tool for me, it's also a drum enhancement tool. And that's what I kind of did here. So we're just using Slate Trigger here, Trigger 2, which I'm a big fan of, and I'm using a couple of kick samples that I got from a third party. I forget where it's from. I think it's called, I think the website is called thatsound.org. I think they have a bunch of trigger samples that you can purchase. But a lot of times I just use the samples that come with trigger, to be honest, and they sound great. But every now and again, I like to experiment. And what's great about trigger is you can use either trigger files or you can use just standard old wave files. So any old wave file that you have of a sample, you can use. And so I'm doing that. And going over to tape machine like before. Over to the console again. And then back over to the API channel strip. Okay, so here on the channel strip, again, I'm doing a low cut of about 30 hertz. No high pass on here. No gate this time around. We're just using, because it's a sample, we don't need a gate. Using the compressor here again, same compressor settings as all the drums as I talked about. Fast attack, 3-to-1, medium, slow release, and then the threshold dialed into taste. Again, about 3 dB, 2 to 3 dB. And the reason why I'm not compressing so much here either is because, again, I know that these were recorded very well, which means there was probably some compression on the way in. I don't know if this was recorded to tape originally, but if it was, there was some compression there. So again, I try to do things very sparingly when it comes to compression. I call it controlled compression, just trying to tame the peaks. Don't get too crazy. You don't need to smash and squash the hell out of everything. At least not just yet. So that's what we're doing on compression. For EQ over 10K, I got about a 2 dB bump. At 5K, I got an 8, or no, is it 8 or is it 10? It's 9 dBs at 5K. So I'm really trying to bring out the slap. And so it may sound like too much here when we're just soloing up the kick drums, but in the mix tends to get very dense, especially in the chorus with the big chorus guitars, which we'll look at in another video. I really wanted this thing to really cut through and slap through. So I got a lot of high end going on here. And then I pulled out 4 dB at 500 once again, and a little bit of a boost at 50 just to give it a little more oomph. So before the EQ, this is what we have. Let me mute the other two. With our EQ, you can hear how much brighter that sounds. Okay, so that on its own, you may say is too bright, but then when I turn it back down and we start bringing in the rest of the elements, it fits just nicely. And then normally I just start it all the way down, and I just bring it up. And there's our kick drum sound for the most part. And now we have our snare. So let's go to our snare. Snare top. Turn it up a little so you can hear it. I'll exaggerate it. Hopefully it comes out good over YouTube land. Okay, so again, auto align's the first plugin. Again, virtual tape. Also, you should take note here that, again, not slamming the tape machines very hard. Unless you're going for that, again, just trying to give it a little bit of love. It doesn't need to be in the red all the time. VCC. And then over to the API once again. Okay, we got a high cut going on here right around 90 hertz. On the compression side, again, just like with the kick, same compressor settings. We're compressing maybe 2 dB, 3 dB of compression. That's really it. And then on the EQ at 10K, we're boosting about 2 dB. 5K, about 4 dB. And that's about it, I think. Yeah, that's it. About 3 dB of compression. Before this channel strip. After, a lot of brighter. All that muddiness is gone. Okay. How are we doing out there? Doing pretty good. I'm just kind of keeping my eye on the chat as we're going along. Let me know if you can still hear everything okay. We still got about 20, I don't know, some odd people here. So, which is cool. Sounds really good. Okay, cool. Thanks. I'll keep moving. I don't want to bore you guys. Okay, snare bottom. So again, I'm moving these faders around and screwing up the mix, obviously. We'll be rebalancing this for sure. Okay, so again, virtual tape. You can see the pattern, right? Again, just like an analog studio, everything's going through tape, going through the VCC. Here we are on the channel strip. And here we have, again, about a 90 hertz roll off for the snare bottom. We have, let's see here, how much compression? Not much, couple of dB. On the hardest hits, maybe 2 dB. 10K, excuse me, yeah, 10K, about 6 dB of a boost. And that's it, just enough to bring out the bottom of those snares. So before the channel strip, this is what we got with the bottom snare. And there was with the channel strip. I'll lower that back down. Okay. And now we're going over to a snare sample, just like with the kick. I added the sample later, because I just wanted to have it there. And again, when you have a dense mix with lots of guitars and things get thicker in the choruses, I really want something to kind of smack through. So I added the sample, again using trigger, just like with the kick. And this time around, I'm using just a stock standard snare top sample that came with this $99 plugin. Okay, so our sample kind of sounds, is it on? Yeah, something like this. I'll turn it up and exaggerate it. Over to our tape machine. VCC. Channel strip. Okay, about 3 dB of compression again, same compression settings as we've been talking about. This time I'm only doing about a 50 hertz roll off on the low ends. A lot of times you'll see people take snare mics like I do and they'll roll them off at 90, 100 hertz. I wanted a little bit more beef on this one. I wanted a little bit more thickness, so I let the lows creep in a little bit more on this one than I did on the other two. The EQ, 10K, about a 4 dB bump, 5K, about a 2 dB bump, and that was really it. Again, a lot of top. Again, in solo, may sound a little bright. Rest of the mix blends in nicely. So here's before the channel strip. After. I really love this API EQ because it doesn't sound EQ'd. You know, sometimes when you use cheaper, EQ plugins, or you use stock plugins, sometimes when you boost the top end, if you really want to know what makes the difference between something like a stock EQ and like a third-party EQ, depending on what third-party EQ you're talking about now, but like when you talk about UA stuff or even Slate stuff, what you'll find is on stock plugins, typically when you start boosting up around 2K and higher, things tend to get a lot more fizzly and they tend to get a lot more bitey. Where on better EQs, they tend to sound more silky and a little more sweet sounding. And so that's kind of what are the differences when people ask. Yes, they have some analog character to them, but what is really nice about them is that they have a nice smoother top end that doesn't get too bitey, because that's horrible when you have too bitey on EQ when you're doing boosts. Okay, so that's what we're doing on this snare sample. So now I have 3 kicks and 3 snares. Move over to hi-hats. See if we can find a section where he's kind of playing the hi-hat. Probably in here somewhere. I think in the intro, actually. Okay, there's our hi-hat. So usually on hi-hats, I just kind of tuck them in and blend them in, because when we get to the overheads, a lot of times you get a lot of hi-hat in the overhead. So I just kind of use it as kind of a thickener, depending on what I need for that particular mix. So for the hi-hats, again, tape machine, console, API, and over here, high pass on right around 100 hertz. And like a lot of times what you'll see with hi-hats is people will roll them up, 500, 600. They get rid of all the low end of the hi-hat. I never understood why. To me, I like the hi-hat to have a little bit of thickness to it. I don't like to roll it up too high and it gets too, and I don't like that. So I tend to, let a little more lows come through in on my hi-hat than usually what I see when I see other people's mixes. And then over here on the compressor, again, I don't know how much we're compressing, not much. It's going to roll back around here. Couple of dB. And the only EQ I'm doing here is taking out about 4 dB at 500 hertz because I thought the hi-hat sounded okay. Again, the tendency is to brighten up the hi-hat a lot, but again, I don't like that on this particular mix because when I had the overheads, I felt like I had enough hi-hat. So that's why that's what it is. So this is just, really, we're just using this for a filter and we're just taking out a little bit of the 500. And in this case, we're just kind of using the API console as just kind of a tone character, even if I'm not compressing or EQing anything, like here, I'm barely EQing anything and barely compressing anything. I still like to use it as just a way to just run the signal through it. Again, to give that whole, uniformity of the music of all the tracks to kind of give it that cohesiveness. So I'm using it more here probably just for the fact is I'm running it through an analog plugin than anything else. Okay, now on our toms, we have two toms, tom 1, tom 2, and they're not hit very much throughout this song. Let me see if I can lower this down a little bit so we can see. There we go. There's not a whole lot going on as far as toms here. Let me just see if I can find a small section, not bore you to death with repetitiveness. Okay, so that's tom 1, and I'm using a sample, using trigger again. The reason why is I wasn't thrilled with the tom sounds, and I found myself having to EQ to death out of these things to get them to sound right, so I just replaced them. So, and again, I'm just using a couple of samples that came with trigger, standard stock, nothing special, no third-party stuff needed. Again, using the tape machine over to the VCC. Again, over to AutoAlign, over to the API Vision channel strip. And let's see what we're doing here. So again, I got to roll a high pass at right around 40 hertz. Again, let a little bit of the lows in. This is a tom 1 and tom 2. This is kind of a smaller rack tom and probably a floor tom. I don't know the size of the rack tom, but it sounds a little on the smaller side to me. So I wanted to kind of make sure we had enough lows coming through. Again, not compressing very much. On the EQ at about 2K, I got about a 2 dB boost, or 2.5K, sorry. 5K, I got about a 6 dB boost. At 500 hertz, I took out a little bit to get rid of that mid-range woofy. And then at 100 hertz, I got a 6 dB boost to kind of bring in a little more top end and a little bit more girth, I should say. So before the EQ, this is what we have. After. So it just kind of brightens it up a little bit to get it to cut through the mix, basically. On its own, it doesn't sound fantastic. It's a little ringy. I could probably gate that a little bit, but in the mix, you really don't notice it, and it sounds pretty good, I thought. So I just kind of left it, and I might go back and tweak it. For tom 2, pretty much the same drill. Nothing major here. I used Trigger 2, sampled it. Let's just jump right to the API because you already saw the tape machine and the virtual console already. So again, same compression settings. On the EQ, 7K, about 4 dB boost, 5K, 2 dB boost. 500 hertz took a little bit out, 2 dB. 100 hertz, 4 dB bump. So before, or I'll just do before the whole channel strip. This is now the second tom. Let me, I'll mute the first one so you don't have to hear the first tom. After. So it just adds a little bit more thickness, really, is what I was really looking for, to make it sound like a nice deep floor tom. And I think I have a little more work to do with the toms, but we're getting there. Again, this mix is not done by any means. Okay, so now we got tom 1, tom 2 covered. So now over to our overheads. Let me try to lower these a little bit. Okay, let's get back to a verse here, so we're not listening to the same tom fill, right? We won't want that. So let's take a look at our overheads. Again, I have overheads left, overheads right. They're panned hard left and right, and they're treated exactly the same way. So let's take a look at what we got. We'll just turn them on here. And right away you hear all that hi-hat, which is the reason why my hi-hats are usually kind of low, because you just can't escape hi-hats in the overhead mics. There's just really no way to get rid of it. Okay, so we'll just look at the left, and the right is exactly the same. So we have the VTM. Okay, and then we're over at the API, and you can really hear those toms really fill out nicely. We'll talk about that when we talk about the EQ. So now all of those sudden, that tom fill sounds a lot more lively with the overheads, because I used EQ to kind of help me get there. Because the close mics on a tom, sometimes it's hard to get that punch and that depth to really come through, because the microphone is so close to the drum. Where the overheads, the tom gets a chance to breathe. Okay, if that makes sense. And I like to use my overheads. It's not just to pick up the cymbals. A lot of guys and gals, they'll use their overheads as a cymbal mic, or they think of it as cymbal mics. I think of it as taking a picture of the entire drum kit. And I know that the way this was recorded, the engineer had in mind, they really wanted to take a picture of the entire kit. They weren't just looking to pick up the cymbals. And I like to use that to my advantage to give this the whole drum kit a much more big, full sound. Okay, so let's start with the low cut. So right away, you can see my low cut's only at 50 hertz, where typically you would see that low cut at like 200, 250, 500 maybe even, because a lot of engineers are just trying to pick up the top end of the drum kit. Like I said, I want to hear everything. I even want to hear part of that kick drum. I want to hear the fullness of the snare, and I want to hear the deepness of the toms. Okay, the compression again is the same as before. Now, the compression on the overheads is going to be a little bit more, probably 3 dB to 6 dB worth of compression as opposed to 2 dB of compression, because I really want to get that thing to kind of pull forward in the mix. I'm going to use the overheads as a way to kind of fill out this drum sound. And you can see here from an EQ perspective, 500 hertz, I took out 4 dB, and then at 100 hertz, I boosted it 4 dB. Again, trying to bring out some of the fullness of the kit. So if I go before the channel strip, I'm gonna have to do both of them because these are grouped together. So here's the left, because I already grouped them in that's a Pultec. You can't see that yet. Let's do this first. Okay, so here are the two left and right channel strips. Before the channel strips. With. Okay, so I don't know if you guys heard that when I bring these channel strips in, all of a sudden the drums feel like they pull a little bit more forward and they get a little bit more life and a little bit more thickness. I'll do that again. I'm going to shut them off, and then, I don't know, halfway through, maybe right before that drum fill, I'll kick them on so you can kind of hear what these overheads are doing and kind of how I'm using these overheads. So here's before, right? Nope, let me turn this one off too. Yep, they're off. Here's before, and then I'll turn it in right towards the end of this this line here. Right, can really hear the toms come forward now, and they just sound, to me, I don't know how it's coming across on the stream, they just sound right. Okay, so that's what I did with the overheads. Okay, and then last but not least, certainly, we have the rooms. And the room mics, oh no, I'm sorry, I got one more thing to show you on the overheads. I kind of gave you a sneak peek and didn't take you all the way through. So after the Vision channel strip, I wanted to follow it up with another EQ. Let me explain why. So here I'm using the UAD Pultec EQ. Here's for the left. Oh, did I bring that up? Where is my Pultec? Oh, okay, there we go. I got to pin it. You think I would know Studio One by now, right? Okay, here we go. So we have the left and the right channel. These are mono EQs. There's one for the left, one for the right. So now the thing around the Pultec, or let me just take you down a rabbit hole for 1 second. I hope you guys don't have any problem with that. Well, you shouldn't. I'm trying to teach you my thought process, right? Isn't that the point of you watching this? So anyway, the way I look at, again, we talk about analog style mixing, and we talk about channel strip mixing and trying to emulate what would happen if this was being mixed in a real studio and I was going through a real API console and I was coming through a real multi-track tape machine and I was going through a real API channel strip on a desk. One of the things that you have at your disposal in an analog studio, and every analog studio is a little different, but you will always have some sort of hardware. Things like Pultec EQs, things like 1176s. You might have some LA2A compressors. You may even be lucky enough to have some Fairchild compressors. And that kind of thing. And so a lot of times what will happen is the mix engineer will find certain elements of their mix where they want to insert some of this extra hardware to give that section or that element that they're putting these EQs on, in this particular case, the overheads, give it a little bit something extra. Think of it as like a little extra spice in the soup, right? Where I want the overheads to sound not only different, I want to sound a little bit different than everything else because everything else is running through the API console. We're running through the VCC. We're running through the same tape plugins. So how do I make these things stand out a little bit and give it a little bit more life and a little bit more uniqueness? One way to do that is to add either an additional EQ and or an additional compressor to give that overhead in this drum kit a little bit more something special. And that's what I did here. Now, you could take, in the world of digital, you could take this Pultec and you can slap it across all of the drums and not use the EQ on the API at all if you wanted to. I mean, we have unlimited amount of Pultecs, right? I mean, that's the great thing about digitals. We have unlimited amount of plugins at our disposal. The problem with that is when you sprinkle something like a Pultec or 1176 or any one of those compressors or EQs across all of your tracks, now that whole thing about having those tracks sound a little unique from the rest of the tracks kind of goes away because, again, they all have the same thing on it. Make sense? Did I explain that okay? So what I like to do is I like to think of this just like if I was in an analog studio. If I was in an analog studio, I wouldn't have, if we have 12 drum microphones, I wouldn't have 12 Pultecs in the studio. No studio has that many Pultecs. I wouldn't have 12 1176s. I might have a couple of Pultecs if I'm lucky. I might have a couple of 1176s. I might have one LA2A. And so as the mix engineer, I'm going to want to mix this thing and I'm going to have to decide, well, what tracks do I want to use these pieces of hardware on? Because I can't use them on all of them. Again, we're not going to print it back into Pro Tools or into Studio One. I'm talking about analog where there was no computer, where we were going directly to tape. So if we're going directly to tape, I can't put the Pultec, if I only have 2 of them, I can't put them on 20 channels. I can only put them on 2. So what am I going to put them on? And when you do that, you limit yourself. And when you limit yourself, you start to be more creative on the way you use some of these plugins. And that's the real secret around using analog style plugins. It's not so much, okay, we're running the signal through it. It sounds better than the stock plugin. It does. But it's more than that. It's how do you use them in a creative way to make the mix have its own unique sonic footprint. Okay. And so that's how I think about these things. So in this case, I'm using the Pultecs again because I wanted to brighten up a little bit of the top end of these overheads. And I wanted to use something like a Pultec because this is a tube style EQ. And the great thing about a Pultec is that no matter what you run through it, it sounds good. Whenever you turn up the high end, it never sounds shrilly. It always sounds smooth because it's a tube-based emulation. The hardware is a tube-based unit. And so the top end is typically very smooth on a tube-based EQ. Same thing with an LA2A, which is a tube-based compressor, okay? So I wanted to just run this through it. I wanted to do nothing on the low end, just give it a little bit of top boost at 12K, and I'm not even doing much, just to brighten these things up a little bit. And I'm going to demonstrate now, after you listen to me ramble for 5 minutes, what it sounds like. So I'm going to shut them off, okay? Now I have the rest of the mix playing for the drums, and I'm going to do this in the context of the mix because this is how I would typically do this. I wouldn't do this in solo. So my overheads are already a little louder than they should be. I just want you to be able to hear them. So if I play this loop back, okay, here's our overheads. Now the Pultecs are off. And that's with the Pultecs. Let it loop around again before. Okay, hear how it just kind of opens up that top end at 12K. Again, I don't know how well this will come out over the live stream. Maybe in the archive it'll sound more obvious, but if you're listening to this on a good set of studio monitors, you should be able to hear that. Again, it's subtle, but it's definitely there. And it doesn't sound like it's EQ'd. It just sounds natural. And that's what I love about the Pultec EQs. And I highly recommend, if you don't have universal audio, that's fine. If you don't have the hardware, you can check out Waves makes the, what the hell is it called? The Puig Tech, the Jack Joseph Puig emulation. That's, I don't know if I have that one, but I've heard it, and that's a very good emulation. And I think Softtube makes the Tube Tech, might be the other one. Maybe Johnny in the chat room, you would know. But there are other companies that make emulations of Pultecs. I tend to like the Universal Audio ones the best because I've been using them longer, but any kind of Pultec style EQ works very, very well in this instance. So that's what I did with the overheads by adding that. And as you can see so far, that is the only other set of plugins that I used, except all the other tape machines, Vision Channel Strip, so on and so forth. The only thing that I did that was different so far in this drum kit was add those Pultecs. Again, to give the overheads a little bit of a unique vibe. Okay, over to the room. So again, we have a left and a right. Let me lower the, I'm going to lower this a little bit and bring up the room so you can hear them. Okay, now the one thing that I did not use auto align on is on the room mics. I used them on all the drums but the room mics. And the reason why I don't use them on the room mics, and I talked about this in the demo that I did that's on the YouTube channel, you should go check that out if you haven't seen it, was because when the room mics are typically placed far away from the drum kit in a room, right? That's usually how they're set up when you're miking up a live drum kit. And if you align the phase between the overheads and the rooms, what ends up happening is you lose a sense of depth. Okay, so by having the rooms not being phase corrected, quote unquote, you're gonna retain that space, and so that's why I did that. And sometimes I experiment with it. Sometimes I'll put it on the room mics and it makes the whole kit sound better, and sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it did not, so I didn't put them on there, and that's the case more times than not. So again, just like all the other tracks, we're going through Tape Machine and we're going through the virtual console, and then we're over to the API channel strip. And again, I'll bring them both up on the screen so you can see before and after, or you can hear before and after. Okay. Let me pin this. So on the room mics, left and right, again, we're doing a high pass or a low cut at only right around 50 hertz. Again, I don't want to, I want to hear the room. I want to hear the kick drum. Part of the bottom end of this drum kit is coming from the rooms, and it's coming from the overheads. I don't roll them off as high as most people typically would. On the compressor, all the settings are the same as before. On the EQ, the only thing that we're really doing here, we're doing two big things. At 500 hertz, we're taking out just a couple of dB. And then the big enchilada here is at 50 hertz, I'm boosting at 12 dB. Okay, that's a massive boost on room mics. And again, I want the thickness of that bottom end. I want to hear the bottom of the room. Okay, so I really, even though I got a high pass, it's right around 45 hertz or so, and right around 50 hertz. As soon as that high pass kind of kicks off, I'm bringing in a lot of bottom ends. Okay, and I want to do that purposely because I want to hear the bigness of the kit. So I'm going to go before. Here's before this channel strip. Here's what we got, and then I'll kind of turn it on as we get through. So it even helps fill out the floor tom a little bit more too. And again, it's subtle. It's not massive, it's subtle, but it's definitely there. So just again, little layers, little moves here and there. Even though that was a big boost, it didn't affect the overall sound dramatically. Okay, because right around that high pass, I threw the high pass in, and right after the high pass filter, or the low cut filter, is where I made that boost. Okay, and so that's all I did there. There's no additional processing there. And then usually, again, I'll keep the rooms normally lower than the overheads. Okay, just to bring a little bit of space. I mean, this is a country rock tune. It's more of a modern song. It's not an 80s hair metal band, so we don't want this massive, room sound. We're going for something that's just slightly over dry. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So now before we get to the drum reverb, let's just take a look at the drum bus. And again, I know I've screwed up the mix here a little bit, playing with the faders. But here's what we're doing, again. We're not slamming anything. Just about a dB on the FG Gray. This is a wonderful plugin, this FG Gray. Really brings a lot of life into the kit. Now, last but not least, and then we'll end this live stream for today, we're going to take a look at the drum reverb. So I'm using the same reverb plugin. It's not really a reverb, it's a room emulation plugin on all my groups of instruments, so you'll see this in the future as well. But what I'm using here is I'm using the Universal Audio Ocean Way Studios. If you're a Universal Audio user and you don't have this plugin, you should absolutely go get this. It's great on drums, but it's great on everything. I mean, this is an expensive plugin, but when you buy it between Thanksgiving and Christmas time, you can normally get this plugin for about $150. It's normally a $400 plugin. Excuse me, needed a drink there. But this thing just sounds amazing. Now, this is a room emulation of the famous Ocean Way Studios. I'm not going to walk through the entire plugin, but basically you can go see a bunch of videos, and I think I have one on my YouTube channel, shows you how to do it. But basically you have up here in the top left studio, you have a Studio A and Studio B. We're picked on Studio B, and you have your source, and they have a bunch of different sources: drums, strings, horns, pianos, vocals, blah, blah, blah. And then you can see kind of the diagram of what their room looks like. And these two little, here's our drum kit in the corner. And then if you go to Studio A, it actually changes the room and changes the position of the drums and the microphones to it and stuff. It just gives it a little bit of a different feel. And then if you go from, let's say, I want to go over drum B, right? Yeah, there we go. And if I go from drums 1 to drums 2, you can just see it changes the position. It gives you kind of the dimensions of the room and, you know, how they kind of mapped it all out, which is cool. Now, this plugin can be used in two different ways. It can be used as a standard reverb, which is the way I'm using it, over here in the mode section in the top right-hand corner, where you would put it on its own track and send everything to it, like you would any typical reverb. Or you can use it in what's called re-mic mode, where you would put it as the insert of the track, where, let's say, if it was an acoustic guitar and you wanted to emulate that acoustic guitar being mic'd up, you know, with a real microphone, and not, you would use the re-mic mode. And it just has a little bit of a different feel to the way it sounds. It sounds great. And if I have a mix coming up where I use it in re-mic mode, and I do from time to time, I'll make sure I demonstrate that for you. But for today, I'm just doing it in the reverb mode. Standard, just put it on a bus and send everything to it. It has 3 microphones here in this little channel fader. We have a near mic, a mid mic, and a far. And you can see in the diagram there's only 2 little microphone sets here because the third one, the far one, is muted. If I unmute it, you could see now in the diagram there are 3 sets of microphones. And you can change the distance between the relationship between them up here with these 3 colored dials: green, yellow, or red, yellow, green. I'm not using the far, and the reason why I'm not using the far is because I felt it gave it too big of a sound. And again, I want these drums to be a little bit more punchy. I don't want the room to be too obvious. I don't want the reverb to be too obvious in this particular mix. Okay, so if I start, and I'll exaggerate it. So, and what I did was I just sent all of my drums, you can see here, pre-fader, all the way over to the drum reverb. And you use pre-faders, so no matter what I do with these channels, like I was moving around these faders before during this demonstration, it does not affect the level going to the Ocean Way plugin. Okay, and then what I'll do is I'll exaggerate it so you can hear what it sounds like. Okay, way too much, right? So that's too much. So what I basically do is I just start with it all the way down and I just dial it into taste, just where I can hear it, and then I back it off a little. And I'm constantly adjusting this throughout the mix because we're only listening to the drums right now. By the time the rest of the mix comes in, inadvertently I'll end up having to turn this up a little. No reverb at all. Before. Again, not sure how that's coming across on the stream, but it's just a hair. Okay. I'm really focused in on the snare drum. I'm listening for the snare. I'm listening for the sustain of the snare. And I'm just kind of using that as my guide on how much reverb I want to have, or room sound. Again, this is not a reverb. This is a room. It's emulating the live room in a famous studio, where what's reverb on drums, unless you have a really good reverb plugin. I'm not a big fan of a typical reverb on drums because it always sounds artificial to me. Tends to sound too washy, unless you're going for a big, like you had, say, like a piano vocal ballad and it was supposed to have a lot of ambience and a lot of that kind of vibe, then that's great. But for something like this, where we're just trying to put some space around the drums to give it a little bit bigger feel, so it doesn't feel like it was recorded in a closet, that's what I'm using this for. So that's what I'm doing on the drums. So that is basically our, I know I screwed up the mix on us, but that is basically our drum mix. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. We've been on here a little bit over an hour. I hope that wasn't too boring. I hope you were able to see and hear everything clearly. Again, our first time kind of going live. I don't see too many complaints in the chat, so that's actually a good thing. We still have about 25 people here, which is great. And that's kind of how I went about this drum mix, and how I'm kind of approaching this whole mix. It's very much an analog kind of a feel. And again, I want things to be kind of upfront in your face and kind of punchy with a little bit of space, but not too many not any really washy effects. So let me just check out the chat and see what you guys got going on here. I'll look at that over here. Dave is asking, just wondering, when you use a fast, medium, or slow attack and release on the compressor, how do I decide on the speed? Okay, great. That's a great question. I'm going to give you the 30-second answer, and if you really want to learn in depth, I urge you to go out and check out Mixing Made Easy Volume 2, where I spend, I don't know, Johnny, help me, a solid hour on this topic, where I really talk about how I decide that. But the short answer is, usually, again, and I'm going to talk in general terms here because it changes every mix, but on drums, in a song like this, I'm using a fast attack. And on a song like this, with a drum kit like this, I would probably always use a fast attack. And the reason why I'm using a fast attack is because by using a fast attack, it's going to give the listener the impression that the drums are kind of sitting back in the mix. Okay, if you think about a band, you're looking at a band on stage, a band that's performing, where are the drums? 9 out of 10 times, unless you're in the Stray Cats. I don't know if anyone here is old enough to know who the Stray Cats are from the 1980s, but the Stray Cats had a drummer that was right up front with the vocalist. But most bands, the drummer is sitting behind the vocalist, behind the guitar players, behind the keyboard. They're at the very back of the stage. And so in order to get that, when I'm working with compression and panning, but just as equally important, compression, I'm looking to not only compress things, but I'm looking to place them in certain places in what I call the 3D sound field. And again, the 3D sound field, I go into 2 hours worth on Mixing Made Easy Volume 2, where I'm not just looking, where do I put the positions, the instruments left and right. I'm also looking at, where am I putting the instruments front to back. So in this case, I want to push the drums back in the mix. I don't want the drums to be competing with the vocals and the guitars or the pianos. So by using a fast attack, it's going to slide it to the back of the mix a little bit in that 3D sound field. Now, the way I would set the release on a song like this, and the way I did it on a song like this, is I usually would start off with the overheads, and I'm kind of playing the groove back. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set the release. So on the gain reduction meter, we kind of have the release, the meter kind of move into kind of the beat of the music and kind of eighth notes, just kind of move into the beat of the music, not holding on to it too much to where the next kick and snare hit come in. I want that compressor to be released to grab it on the next go around, if that makes sense. Where on something like a bass guitar, I would have a slower release setting because I really want it to hold on to that bass note and I want that thing to sustain more times than not. Again, this is a general thing. Some mixes, what I just said means nothing, but that's kind of how I go about thinking about it. So I set the release, and it's usually on drums a fairly quick release. I want to get it out of the way, compress it, control the transients, push it back in the mix, and get out of the way so it can compress again. And that's how I kind of set that. I hope that makes sense. That was a very condensed answer of really the way it's really done. And again, check out Mixing Made Easy Volume 2, and you'll learn all about the 3D sound field. Yes, and Johnny said Compression Made Easy is also good for this question. Yeah, I also go over that in Compression Made Easy as well, Johnny. But when we're talking about the 3D sound field and the way I like to place instruments in the mix. Mixing Made Easy Volume 2 is where I really spend a lot of time on that. And you're welcome, Dave. And usually that's something, and even for me, I didn't really get into that kind of thing. You know, I didn't really have that kind of thought process until about 5 years ago when I was, studying with a fairly famous mix engineer and private study, and he taught me that trick. And as soon as I kind of wrapped my head around it, and I got to tell you, it took some time to wrap my head around it. And so if you do watch my demonstrations of it in some of my products, don't feel that if you don't get it in the first 10 minutes that either there's something wrong with you or you just can't get it. It is a little confusing. At least for me it was. I'm not the brightest guy in the world. It took me a while to get it, but once I wrapped my head around it and once I was able to hear it, it really changed the way I look at compression. And so I would highly recommend that you kind of get your arms around that, because the difference between a real amateur mix and a pro level mix, and there's stages in between, is how guys use compression. If you really learn how to use compression more than just controlling the peaks, when you learn to use compression for tone, and when you learn to use compression for moving the instruments around the 3D sound field, that's what makes a mix start to come together. So I hope that helps. Any other questions? I know we're on here a little bit longer than we probably should. I'll probably cut this video short, and it will be in the YouTube archive. So if you did join us late, welcome. And we're going to be doing more of these. Hopefully the sound and the audio has been good for you. I don't see any complaints in the chat, so that's a good thing. We still have about 31 people here hanging in there. And again, if you missed any part of this, it will be in the archive. It will be under my playlist called Live Streams, Events, I think it's called. And I will go ahead and put it up there. And then probably in the next couple of days, I will come back and I will start bringing in the bass and the guitars. And we'll continue on with this mix, and we'll take you on this little journey over the next 4 or 5 videos. So any other questions at all before I sign off here? Again, I thank you once again for coming in and checking out things. If you have any questions at all, you can always email me. Go to my website, homerecordingmadeeasy.com, hit the contact page. You can send me an email. I will get back to you. It may take a day or two, depending on my email load, but I will get back to you. I will check it out. And that's it, man. So thank you again. Thanks so much, Randall and Johnny and all the guys that are here. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to sign off for now so we can get this thing kind of set up on YouTube. And I will be back over the next few days. And I'll jump on here and you'll get notified when I'm online. And if you missed the live event, don't worry, because it'll always be in the archive and we'll continue on with this mix. So again, thanks so much. And I will talk to you guys all soon. Take care.